She slammed her laptop shut, stood up from the beach chair, and threw her phone into her bag like it had personally insulted her. "Enjoying the view?" she called out, sharp teasing, the kind of tone that ran boardrooms and ended careers. The man didn't flinch, didn't turn around right away. He just kept his eyes on the water, calm, steady, and when he finally looked back at her, what he said stopped her cold. Because no one had ever said that to Sophia Reed. Not in 15 years at the top. This is the story of a CEO who thought she had everything, and a Navy dad who showed her she had nothing that actually mattered. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The phone was already ringing before Sophia Reed's feet hit the sand. She ignored it. She had promised that this week would be different. No calls before 9. No emails before coffee. No standing in the middle of a beach in a silk blouse, with her heels dangling from 2 fingers, while her assistant tried to patch her into a conference call with the Tokyo office. And yet, the phone buzzed again. Then again. Then a rapid triple buzz that meant Marcus, her VP of operations, had escalated it to urgent. She closed her eyes, breathed in the salt air, and picked up. "Marcus, I swear to God, Sophia." His voice was tight. "I wouldn't call if it wasn't. It's 7 in the morning. The Hendricks deal is falling apart. Collins people are saying we misrepresented the third quarter projections, and they're threatening to, we didn't misrepresent anything." Her voice dropped. Cold. Precise. The voice she used when she needed a room to go quiet immediately. "Pull the original disclosure, page 41 subsection C. Read it to them verbatim. If they still have a problem, tell them I'll be available by phone at 11, not a minute before." Silence on the other end. "Got it," Marcus said. "And Marcus." She slid her sunglasses on. "Don't call me before 9 again unless the building is on fire." She hung up. Crescent Bay stretched out in front of her, wide and unhurried and completely indifferent to Sophia Reed and her third quarter projections. The sky was the kind of pale, washed-out blue that existed only in early morning before the day made up its mind. A few seagulls. The sound of small waves that seemed almost polite compared to the ocean she'd grown up watching as a kid in Connecticut. She hadn't been back to a beach, any beach, in almost 3 years. Her therapist had been the one to suggest this. "You need stillness, Sophia. Real stillness. Not a spa weekend. Not a weekend in the Hamptons where you're still networking at dinner. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere nobody knows your name." Crescent Bay was exactly that. A small coastal town on the Oregon coast. The kind of place with one good coffee shop, a bookstore that smelled like cedar, and a population that apparently had no idea who the CEO of Reed Industries was. Which was either deeply humbling or deeply offensive, depending on the hour. She set up her chair, the nice folding one the rental cottage had stocked, not the flimsy plastic kind, planted her bag and pulled out her laptop. Just to check one thing. One thing turned into 12. 12 turned into 40 minutes. And somewhere in the middle of reviewing a contract amendment, she absolutely did not need to be reviewing at this moment, a sound cut through her focus so cleanly that she actually looked up. Laughter. Not adult laughter. Kid laughter, the reckless full-body kind, the kind that had no agenda and no self-consciousness whatsoever. It came from down the beach, maybe 40 feet away. And it was the laugh of a small boy who had just done something either very brave or very stupid. Both, as it turned out. The kid she guessed 4, maybe 5, had run directly into a wave and been knocked flat on his back. He sat in the surf, soaking wet, and instead of crying, he looked at the sky and lost it. Arms wide open, head thrown back. Laughing like the ocean had just told him the best joke he'd ever heard. The man standing a few feet behind him didn't panic, didn't rush. He walked forward, steadily crouched down to the boy's level, and said something Sophia couldn't hear. Then the boy grabbed the man's hand, and they both stood up, dripping, the man now just as wet as the kid, because the wave had caught him too. He didn't seem to mind. He actually looked like he was trying not to smile. Sophia watched them for longer than she meant to. The man was built like someone who hadn't had an easy decade broad shoulders, the kind of posture that came from years of carrying weight literal or otherwise. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and board shorts that had seen better days. He wasn't trying to look like anything. He just was what he was. He crouched again, and this time he helped the boy dig something out of the wet sand with both hands, both of them completely absorbed in whatever they'd found. A shell, maybe. A crab? It didn't matter. What mattered was the way the man looked at the kid, while the boy talked like everything the boy said was the most interesting thing he'd heard all day. Sophia realized she'd stopped typing. She looked down at her laptop, back up at them. Then she made herself stare at the screen again, because she had work to do, and she was not the kind of woman who sat on beaches staring at strangers. She came back the next morning. This surprised her a little. She told herself it was because the coffee at the cottage was better than the cafes, and there was no reason to drive into town. She told herself the beach at this hour was the best time to take calls actually, because of the ambient noise regulation, and the lack of they were already there. The boy she could see now, that he was definitely around 4 or 5, with dark hair sticking up in every direction, was building something in the sand with focused intensity, tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth. The man was sitting back on his heels a few feet away, letting the kid work occasionally, handing him a stick or a shell when he held his hand out without looking up. Sophia set up her chair, opened her laptop, answered 3 emails. On the 4th email, her phone buzzed. She stood to take the call and paced the way she always did when she needed to think, and without planning to, she drifted closer to them. The boy looked up and stared at her with the particular directness that very small children hadn't yet learned to hide. "You have a computer at the beach," he said. "I do," she said. "Why?" "Because I have work to do." He considered this seriously. "My dad says the beach is for not working." "Your dad sounds very wise," Sophia said, and she meant it slightly more than she intended to. The man looked up then. He had dark eyes, steady, unhurried, and a face that had been weathered in a way that wasn't unpleasant. There was a small scar along his jaw that she noticed because she noticed details. It was how she'd gotten where she was. "Sorry about him," the man said. "He talks to everyone." "I don't mind." She hesitated, which was not something she did often. "I'm Sophia." "Daniel." He nodded at the boy. "This is Leo." Leo had already gone back to his construction project. He held out a hand without looking up. "Hand me that rock." Sophia blinked. Then she looked down, found a smooth gray rock near her foot, and handed it to him. "Thank you," Leo said very seriously. "You're welcome," she said, equally serious. Daniel watched this exchange with something carefully neutral on his face, though she thought just for a second that he might be amused. "He's building a fort," Daniel said. "In case you were wondering." "I wasn't going to ask." "Most people ask." "I'm not most people." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read, then nodded once, like he'd decided to take her word for that. She came back the 3rd morning, and by then she stopped pretending she didn't know why. It wasn't Daniel, she told herself. It wasn't the way he moved through the morning without urgency, without his phone in his hand, without a single visible sign of the constant low-grade anxiety that Sophia had come to think of as the baseline condition of all serious adults. It wasn't the way Leo dragged him into elaborate games, and Daniel played along completely, not in the distracted, half-participating way that parents in her world engaged with their children with one eye on their notifications, but completely fully present in a way that made Sophia feel oddly uncomfortable, like watching something she'd forgotten was possible. It wasn't any of that. She just liked the beach at this time of day. That was all. "You're back," Leo announced when he saw her. "I am," she agreed. "Are you going to work on your computer again?" Probably. He shook his head slowly, like she'd confessed something unfortunate. My dad says when you work too much, you forget how to hear the water. She glanced at Daniel, who was carefully not looking at her with the focused attention of a man who was definitely listening. Did he say that? She asked. He says it a lot, Leo said. He said it to Grandma too. Leo, Daniel said mildly. What she did, work too much. Okay, bud. Sophia sat down in her chair a little closer than yesterday, though she hadn't planned it. She opened her laptop, read 4 words of an email, and closed it again. Can I ask you something? She said. Daniel looked over. Sure. Do you actually believe that the thing about hearing the water? He was quiet for a moment, which she was starting to understand was just how he operated. He didn't fill silence. He let it sit. I spent a lot of years, he said finally, in places where I couldn't hear anything over the noise in my own head. When I got out, when it was just me and him. He nodded at Leo. I figured out pretty fast that the only way I was going to be okay was to learn to be where I actually was. That's easier said than done. Most true things are. She looked at him. You were in the Navy. He corrected gently. Reserve now, but yeah. Single dad? Yeah. She waited for him to explain further. He didn't. Doesn't that... She stopped. Started again. That seems like a lot to carry. Daniel glanced at Leo, who was now conducting what appeared to be a trial of a very guilty-looking seashell. It is, he said. And it isn't. He makes it make sense. He paused. You have kids? No. Partner? No. He nodded, not with pity, which she appreciated. Just acknowledgement. What do you do? He asked. I run a company. What kind? She hesitated. Not because she was ashamed of it. She'd never been ashamed of it. Had built Reed Industries from a regional consulting firm into a $2 billion enterprise over 15 years of 7-day weeks and decisions that kept her awake at night. She hesitated because for the first time in a very long time, she didn't want that to be the first thing he knew about her. Technology sector, she said. Infrastructure. Big company. Yes. He looked at her laptop, at her phone which had already buzzed twice this morning, and which she had somewhat heroically not looked at. Vacation? He asked, attempting one. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. How's it going? You saw me answer 3 calls before 8 a.m. yesterday. I wasn't looking. You were definitely looking. He didn't deny it this time. It was on the 4th morning that she did it. She hadn't meant to. It came out of something careless the way it always did, the way she'd been trained early on, that control was armor, that the best way to manage a room was to keep people slightly off balance, slightly on the back foot, never quite sure where they stood with you. She'd done it 1,000 times in conference rooms. She'd never done it on a beach. Daniel was standing at the water's edge, watching Leo chase a retreating wave with the pure, terrifying boldness of a 4-year-old who does not yet understand consequences. The early morning light was doing something particular to the water, and Daniel was standing very still, watching his son, and there was something about the stillness that did something strange and uncomfortable to Sophia's chest. She stood up from her chair. She walked toward him. And when she reached him, instead of saying anything real, instead of saying the honest thing whatever that was, she tilted her sunglasses down, looked at him sideways, and said in the voice she used when she wanted a room to laugh and pay attention and understand that she was in charge. Enjoying the view. It was teasing, flirtatious in that sharp arch way she'd perfected. The kind of thing that kept people at a specific comfortable controlled distance while appearing to invite them closer. He didn't react the way people usually reacted. He didn't laugh or flirt back, or get flustered or stand up a little straighter, or do any of the dozen things people did when Sophia Reed aimed her full attention at them. He just looked at her, calm, unhurried, like he was reading something slowly and carefully. Then he said, "Yeah, I am." And he turned back to the water. Not back to her, back to Leo. Back to his son, who had just successfully jumped over a wave for the first time and was looking back at his father with his arms raised, waiting. Daniel raised his arms too. And that was it. That was the whole thing. 4 words. Yeah, I am. Quiet, clear, without performance, without a single calculation behind them. He had not been looking at her. He had been looking at his son and the water and the morning, all of it, and he had meant every word completely. Sophia stood there with the tide coming in around her shoes. Nice shoes, the wrong shoes for this, she'd known that, and felt something she couldn't immediately name. It took her a moment to recognize it because it had been so long. Embarrassment. Not the professional kind. Not the tactical retreat she did when a deal went sideways and she needed to regroup. The real kind. The kind that meant she'd reached for her usual tools and they'd found nothing to grip. Leo ran back toward them, wet and breathless. "Did you see me?" he demanded. "Did you see that, Dad? Did you see?" "I saw," Daniel said. He crouched and caught his son, easily swinging him up despite the wet. "You cleared it." "I totally cleared it." Leo looked over his father's shoulder at Sophia. "Did you see me?" She found her voice. "I saw you," she said. "You were incredible." Leo accepted this as no less than his due and demanded to be put down so he could do it again. Daniel set him on his feet, and the boy sprinted back toward the water without a backward glance. Daniel straightened up. He looked at her, really looked at her the way he'd looked when she'd first introduced herself, like he was deciding something. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said, automatic. He nodded slowly. "Okay." He didn't push. He never pushed. It was one of the most disarming things about him, the complete absence of pressure, the absolute willingness to take you at your word or leave you to yours. She looked out at the water, at Leo knee-deep and giddening fiercely. "I've never," she started. Stopped. "Never what?" She shook her head slightly. She wasn't even sure what she'd been about to say. Something true, probably, which was part of why she'd stopped. "I've never just stood somewhere and looked at something and let it be enough. I've never watched someone love their kid and not been calculating something. I've never felt outmaneuvered by 4 words from a man in a $10 t-shirt and meant it as a compliment." "Nothing?" she said. "Never mind." He let it go. Of course he did. But as she walked back to her chair, she could feel something that had been very tightly wound inside her chest. Something she'd been keeping carefully in place for so long, she'd stopped noticing it. Give the smallest, quietest, most terrifying little shudder. Like the first hairline fracture in something that had always believed itself unbreakable. She sat back down. She opened her laptop. She stared at the screen for a long time. And for the first time in 15 years, Sophia Reed had absolutely no idea what she was doing. She didn't sleep well that night. This wasn't unusual. Sophia Reed hadn't slept well in years, not in the deep, uninterrupted way that actual rest required. She'd made peace with it. 4 hours was enough if the quality was right. 5 was a luxury. She'd built a $2 billion company on 4 hours and black coffee, and she wasn't about to start complaining about it now. But that night was different. It wasn't the Hendricks deal keeping her awake. It wasn't the quarterly review she had pushed off twice already, or the board member, Gerald Ashby, 63 years old, and deeply committed to the belief that a woman under 50 should still be proving herself, who had sent her another thinly veiled email about succession planning. None of that kept her up. What kept her up was 4 words. "Yeah, I am." She lay on her back in the rental cottage with the window cracked and the ocean doing its patient rhythmic thing outside, and she replayed it with the same obsessive precision she brought to every moment that didn't make sense to her. The way he'd said it. The way he hadn't looked at her when he said it. The complete absence of subtext of calculation of anything she could get a grip on. She had been teasing him. That was the thing. She knew how to tease. It was a controlled weapon, a way of establishing warmth while keeping the real distance intact, making people feel chosen while ensuring they never got close enough to see anything they weren't supposed to see. She'd used it on investors, on rivals, on men who thought they were charming her, when in fact she was very precisely managing them. Daniel Harper had not been managed. He'd just answered her honestly. And somehow, that was the most destabilizing thing anyone had done to her in recent memory. She sat up at 5:15, made coffee, and told herself she was not going to the beach until at least 8. She was at the beach by 6:40. They weren't there yet. She set up her chair, opened her laptop, and actually got through 11 emails in a state of focused productivity that she told herself had nothing to do with nervous energy. At 7:10, Leo came running down the path from the public access stairs with a plastic bucket swinging from one hand, and Daniel followed behind him at a pace that never seemed hurried but always managed to keep up. "You're early," Leo said, dropping down next to her chair without being invited, which Sophia found she didn't mind. "So are you," she said. "We're always early. Dad says the best shells get picked up by the birds if you wait too long." "Do birds actually pick up shells?" Leo looked at her with 4-year-old patience. "The ones with stuff inside them." "Fair point." Daniel set his bag down a few feet away and gave her a nod, easy, uncomplicated. A nod that said, "Good morning," without requiring anything in return. She had a whole thing prepared. She'd rehearsed it in the vague way she rehearsed difficult conversations before they happened, which was a habit she hadn't admitted to anyone and never would. A casual mention of yesterday. A light, self-deprecating comment that would land somewhere between acknowledgement and brushing it off. Something that said I was slightly vulnerable for 30 seconds and I'd like to not dwell on it. What she said instead was, "I'm sorry about yesterday." Daniel looked up from unfolding a beach towel. "What about yesterday?" "The thing I said. The way I said it." She kept her voice neutral, business neutral, the tone she used when she was conceding a point in a negotiation and didn't want the other person to see how much it cost her. It was dismissive. "You were being funny," he said simply. "I didn't take offense." "I wasn't being funny. I was being—" She stopped. What was the honest word? Defensive. Reflexive. Afraid of just standing next to you and not having something clever to say. "I was being myself, which isn't always the same thing." He sat down on the towel, forearms on his knees, and looked at her with that steady, unhurried attention that she was starting to understand was not passivity. It was something more deliberate. A choice. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "Seriously." "I know I don't have to. I'm doing it anyway." He nodded once. "Okay. Accepted." She waited for more. He didn't offer more. She had the sudden, absurd feeling of someone who had braced for a door to be heavy and found it swinging open easily. "That's it," she said. "What else do you want?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Leo came barreling back with his bucket, which now had 3 rocks, and what appeared to be a very unfortunate crab situation developing in it. Dad, look." Daniel looked. "Bud, that crab wants to go back. He likes it in there." "He doesn't, actually." "How do you know?" "Because he's trying to climb out." Leo looked into the bucket with the expression of someone whose evidence has just turned against them. "Maybe he's just exploring," Leo said. "Let him explore the ocean," Daniel said. "That's where his family is." Leo considered this with the gravity it deserved, then marched back toward the water with the purpose of a small person who has made a difficult but correct decision. Daniel watched him go, and Sophia watched Daniel watch him, and something about the quiet between them felt different from yesterday, less like 2 strangers and more like 2 people who had established without naming it that they were going to be honest with each other. "How long have you been doing it alone?" she asked. She hadn't planned to ask that. It came out of the same careless place as yesterday, except this time it wasn't armor. It was actual curiosity. Daniel was quiet for a beat. Not the defensive kind of quiet, the processing kind. Since he was 8 months old, he said. His mom and I, it wasn't working before he was born and after. He let that trail off in the clean, unsentimental way of someone who has said the important part and doesn't need to perform the rest. It was better for him. For her too, I think. That's a long time, Sophia said. 3.5 years. He squinted out at Leo. Feels like longer. Feels like shorter. Both at the same time, honestly. Do you have help family nearby? My mom's in Seattle. She comes down when she can. A pause. It's mostly us. She thought about what that meant. The logistics of it alone were staggering to her. A mind that managed international contracts and seven-figure decisions found itself quietly overwhelmed by the math of it. Single-parent military service, a toddler who had apparently no fear of the ocean. The scheduling, the contingencies, the sheer relentlessness of being the only person standing between a small child and everything that could go wrong. Don't look at me like that, Daniel said. She blinked. Like what? Like you're calculating something. She almost laughed. I do that constantly. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. That's the second time you've said that. Because you keep doing it. She looked at him. He looked back at her. And for one strange suspended second, she felt something ease in her chest. Something that had been braced. And she thought, I don't know how he does that. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You've been asking me personal questions for 4 days. This is more personal. He tilted his head slightly. An invitation. Do you ever... She chose the words carefully, the way she chose words in depositions. Do you ever resent it? All of it? The weight of it? Being alone with all of it? He didn't answer right away. She watched him think, watched him actually sit with it, and she realized she was witnessing something she almost never saw anymore, a person who didn't perform their answer before they'd figured out what their answer actually was. Sometimes, he said finally, late at night when he's asleep, and I'm tired enough to be honest with myself, yeah, sometimes I feel it. He paused. But then, I think about what the alternative looks like, and I can't make myself want it. He looked at Leo, who was now standing in ankle-deep water with his hands on his hips like a tiny admiral. He's the whole deal. You know, he's it. Sophia watched Leo point sternly at a wave, as though issuing it instructions. Yeah, she said softly. I can see that. She was quiet for a moment. I've never wanted kids, she said. She wasn't sure why she offered that. It wasn't a confession she made often in her world. It was always political, always received as either a statement of ruthless ambition or a thing that required explanation or reassurance. She said it now simply because it was true. Okay, he said. That's it. Just okay. What do you want me to say? Most people have thoughts about it. I'm sure they do. He leaned back on his hands. Doesn't mean you need to hear them. She sat with that. It was an unremarkable sentence. She didn't know why it made something inside her feel not quite relieved, but something in the neighborhood of it, like being handed a glass of water when you hadn't realized you were thirsty. What about you? He asked. What did you want before the company? The question surprised her. Not because it was inappropriate, it wasn't, but because almost no one asked her that. People asked about Reed Industries. They asked about market position and acquisition strategy, and whether the Hendricks deal would close. They asked where she saw herself in 5 years and 10 in the next fiscal quarter. They did not ask what she had wanted before. I wanted to matter, she said. It came out without the editing she would normally have applied. Not in the global sense, I mean. Just, when I was young, I was the kid everyone forgot about. Middle child, busy parents, good grades, quiet. I wanted to walk into a room and have it mean something. She stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds honest, he said. It sounds like a therapy session. Maybe you've been to a lot of those. She looked at him sharply. He wasn't being cutting, his voice was easy, almost warm. She relaxed. 1 or 2, she admitted. My therapist told me I should come here actually, to Crescent Bay. Said I needed to learn to be still. How's that going? She looked down at her laptop closed now at her feet. She thought about the 11 emails, the 6 calls she'd rerouted, the contract amendment she'd reviewed at midnight in the cottage kitchen with a glass of wine she'd barely touched. Ask me at the end of the week, she said. He almost smiled. She was certain of it this time, the almost smile, the corners of his eyes doing something specific. Leo came back for his bucket and departed again with the single-minded energy of someone who had a very important project and a limited number of vacation days. Sophia watched him and found herself doing something she almost never did in the presence of another adult. Nothing. Just watching. Just being in the same moment. He talks about his mom sometimes, Daniel said quietly, not looking at her. She understood he was continuing a conversation they'd already started, even though they'd moved through other things. She waited. He's too young to fully get it, but he's not too young to notice. He picked up a piece of dry sand and let it run through his fingers. One day last spring, he asked me if she stopped loving him. He was 3. He asked me that. Sophia felt it in her sternum. The specific, unavoidable weight of it. What did you say? She asked. I told him that some people love you with their whole heart and still can't figure out how to stay. He looked out at his son. I don't know if it was the right answer. I don't know if there is a right answer. But he got quieter. Then he went back to playing, which I figured was about all you could hope for at 3. That's a good answer, Sophia said. Her voice was careful. You think? I think most people would have lied. She paused. Or told the truth in a way that made it worse. He looked at her sideways. You seem like someone who doesn't lie much. I lie constantly, she said. In business. That's different. Is it? Business lying is your protecting strategy. Personal lying is protecting yourself at someone else's expense. He said it matter-of-factly, not as a judgment. One of those is a job skill. The other one's a character problem. She stared at him. Where did you come from? She said. He raised an eyebrow. I mean, she shook her head, not quite laughing, but close to it. You say things that are true in a way that most people don't. Navy, he said like that explained it. You spend enough time in environments where a lie at the wrong moment gets people killed. You stop seeing the value in them. She went quiet. He let her. Leo was attempting to excavate something large and ambitious from the wet sand near the waterline, working with both hands and both feet and a focused ferocity that was entirely his father's. Can I tell you something? Sophia said. Sure. She hesitated. This one she hadn't prepared. There was no version of this she had rehearsed, which meant there was a real version of it somewhere underneath, and she was about to say it. I flew here first class on a Tuesday morning and the whole flight I was on calls. Landed, got in the rental, and took 2 more calls in the parking lot before I drove to the cottage. First thing I did when I arrived was open my laptop. She paused. I've been here 5 days, and I haven't read a single page of the book I brought. I brought 4 books. I haven't opened one. What did you bring? Business theory, leadership strategy. 1 biography of a tech CEO, and a novel my assistant suggested that I think I'm never going to read. Daniel looked at her. Something moved across his face, not pity, not judgment. Something that was almost like recognition, like he had seen something similar from the inside. Do you like it? He said. The work? She stopped. It was a question she had not been asked in a very long time, and she was annoyed to realize she didn't have an immediate answer. I'm good at it. That's not what I asked. I know. The silence stretched. It wasn't uncomfortable. I used to, she said finally. I used to love it the way he loves that sand. She nodded at Leo. Like it was the most interesting thing in the world, and I couldn't get enough of it. That feeling. She stopped again. I'm not sure when that changed. Was there a moment? There's never a moment. There's just... She searched for the word. Drift. You wake up one day, and you're 15 years in, and you're running the thing you built, and it's bigger than you ever thought it would be, and you're good at running it, and you're performing being the person who runs it, and somewhere in there the feeling went somewhere and you don't know exactly when. He didn't say anything. He just listened, and it was the most listened to she had felt in so long that she almost stopped talking because of how unfamiliar it was. I told my board I needed a week off for personal health reasons, she said. Gerald Ashby, he's on my board. He sent me a follow-up email 40 minutes later, asking if I was in good enough shape to lead the Q3 review. She laughed once short and dry. A man who has had 2 heart attacks and still golfs 4 days a week asked me if I was healthy enough to do my job. What did you say? I told him I'd see him at the review. Her jaw tightened at the memory. What I wanted to say. She stopped. What did you want to say? Something that would have given HR a very bad week. He laughed at that, a real one, quiet and genuine, the first full laugh she'd heard from him. It did something particular to his face, opened something up that the quietness kept closed, and she stared at it for a second longer than she meant to. He sounds like a piece of work, Daniel said. He's a 63-year-old man who's been waiting for me to fail since 2018. He's patient, I'll give him that. He going to be a problem? Gerald's always a problem. I manage it. She looked at her hands. I manage everything. Daniel watched her face with the careful attention he turned on Leo when his son was working through something difficult. Must be exhausting, he said quietly. Not you're so impressive. Not that's incredible. Just the truth of it said without flinching, and she felt it land in her chest and stay there. Yeah, she said. It is. She hadn't said that out loud to anyone, not her therapist. She'd come close, but there was always a slight performance, even there, always the version of herself that was working on it, taking steps, implementing strategies. Not to her colleagues, obviously. Not to her friends, most of whom were people she'd met professionally and whose esteem she could not afford to lose. Not to her mother, who had sacrificed a great deal for Sophia to have what she'd built and who did not need to hear that it was sometimes simply exhausting to carry. She said it to Daniel Harper, a man she'd known 5 days, who was sitting on a beach towel in board shorts that had a small hole near the left pocket, and who was looking at her with a kind of uncomplicated acceptance that she couldn't figure out how to defend herself against. Leo's shout pulled both of them back. He was holding up something from the sand, triumphant arm fully extended, face blazing. Dad! Dad, look! It's a big one! What is it? Sophia called before she could stop herself. A clam! Leo roared, already running back toward them. It's huge! It's the biggest clam. Is it alive? Daniel asked, leaning forward to look. I don't know. Leo thrust it at Sophia. You check. She took it, turned it over, tapped it gently. Something moved inside it, and she nearly dropped it, and Leo shrieked with delight at her expression. It's alive, he yelled like she'd passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. We should probably put it back, she managed. But it's the biggest one. The biggest ones need the most space, Daniel said. He looked at Sophia. You okay? I have never held a live clam, she said honestly. Leo looked at her with his father's eyes, direct, patient, measuring something. That's kind of sad, Leo said, but also good because now you did. She looked down at the shell in her hands. Still. Alive. Entirely itself, with no interest whatsoever in being impressive. Yeah, she said. She walked Leo to the water's edge, and they put it back together. Leo narrating the release with full ceremony, and when the wave came and took it, he watched it go with a satisfaction so complete and so genuine that she felt it echo somewhere in herself. She stood up, brushed the wet sand from her hands, and realized Daniel had come to stand a few feet behind her watching. He's something, she said. Yeah, Daniel said. He is. They stood there for a moment, the three of them watching the water, and Sophia thought about what her therapist had said about stillness, about learning to be where you actually are, and she thought that this was the first time in years she had stood somewhere without planning what came next. It should have made her anxious. Instead, it felt like something she'd been running toward her entire life without knowing it. The book was still unopened on the nightstand when Sophia woke up the next morning. She stared at it for a moment. The novel her assistant had picked, something about a woman rebuilding her life after loss, which now felt either deeply appropriate or deeply on the nose, and then she got up, made coffee, and sat at the small kitchen table without opening her laptop. She just sat. She lasted 4 minutes before she checked her phone. 11 emails, 2 voicemails from Marcus, a text from Gerald Ashby that read, "Hope the rest is going well. Q3 review prep doc is ready when you are," which was Gerald's version of, "I am watching the clock and so should you." She put the phone face down on the table. She picked it up again and responded to 2 emails, then put it face down again, harder this time, like it had done something to deserve it. The thing was, she knew what she was doing. She wasn't unaware. She had excellent self-awareness. She'd paid enough for it in therapy hours and leadership coaching, and one very expensive executive retreat in Colorado, where a facilitator named Brad had tried to get her to journal her feelings on index cards, and she'd nearly walked out on day 2. She knew she used work the way other people used alcohol or running or picking fights with their partners, as a way to not be alone with whatever was underneath. She just hadn't until this week been entirely sure what was underneath. Sitting on that beach with Daniel, saying the words, "Yeah, it is," out loud for the first time, that had been like pressing a bruise she'd convinced herself wasn't there. It still ached this morning. She was at the beach by 7. But they weren't there. She waited, set up her chair, told herself she wasn't waiting, answered 3 emails with aggressive efficiency, waited some more. By 8:15, she was annoyed at herself for noticing, and by 8:30, she had genuinely talked herself into a state of perfectly reasonable indifference when she heard Leo's voice from up the path. "But I want the red one." "The red one is for when we get ice cream later," Daniel said. "Right now we have the blue bucket." "The blue bucket is too small." "The blue bucket is the same size it was yesterday when you said it was perfect." "I was wrong yesterday." "Okay. Well, we're working with what we have." Leo appeared at the bottom of the steps, first spotted Sophia and pointed at her. "She's here," he announced. "I can see that," Daniel said, coming down behind him. Leo ran to her chair like she'd been there every morning his whole life, which Sophia reflected she essentially had been for the past 6 days. "We went to the store," Leo said. "We got granola bars. Do you want one?" "I'm okay, thank you." "They have chocolate chips." "Then yes." He unzipped Daniel's bag with intense focus, extracted a granola bar, and handed it to her with a formality that she found deeply charming. Daniel sat down on his towel and gave her a look that said good morning, and also you caved fast simultaneously. "Don't say anything," she said. "Wasn't going to." She bit into the granola bar. It was good. The chocolate chips were real, not the waxy kind. She ate the whole thing and didn't think once about the sugar content. "How'd you sleep?" Daniel asked. "Badly," she said. "Honestly." "Still thinking?" "Always thinking. That's the problem." She looked at him. "Do you sleep well?" "Now I do. Took a while." He pulled his knees up, relaxed. "First year or 2 after I got back from my last deployment, I barely slept. Woke up every hour, sometimes every 20 minutes. Leo actually helped weirdly. Getting up with him at 2-3 in the morning, it reset something. Gave the nights a purpose. You turned insomnia into a parenting strategy. Wasn't intentional, but yeah, more or less." She thought about that. The way he talked about the hard things, deployment, single parenthood, not sleeping, the quiet catastrophe of a marriage that hadn't worked. He talked about them like they were terrain he'd crossed. Not behind him exactly, but navigated. Mapped. He didn't carry them the way she carried her things, which was close to the chest, invisible, sealed. "Can I ask you about the Navy?" she said. "Sure." "Was it your choice, going in?" He thought about it. "Yes and no. My dad was Navy. His dad was Navy. It was less a choice and more the current you're born into. By the time I was old enough to question it, I was already in it, and I found out I was actually good at it, so." He shrugged once. The questioning came later. "What did you question?" He looked at her sideways. "Whether the current was taking me where I actually wanted to go." And that's when Leo showed up, which answered it in a roundabout way. He watched his son dig. The reserve made sense. I could serve. I could still be there for him, and I could, I don't know, figure out what comes next. What does come next? Still working on it. She appreciated that he said it plainly without embarrassment. In her world, not having a 5-year plan was a vulnerability people hid. They dressed it up in language about pivoting and exploring opportunities and strategic open-mindedness. Daniel just said, still working on it, like it was a factual status update, which she supposed it was. "I've had a 5-year plan since I was 26, she said. "What's the current one? Expand the Asia-Pacific division, take Reed Industries. Public within 3 years, manage the board transition when Ashby finally retires, before he causes any more damage, and..." She stopped. "I'm doing it again." "Doing what?" "Talking about work like it's the same thing as talking about myself." He didn't say "yes you are," which she appreciated. He just let the recognition sit. "What would you say if you couldn't say anything about work?" he asked. The question was quiet and direct, and it landed like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. "I don't know," she said. And then, because it was true, and he'd been given the honest version of her this week, whether she'd planned it or not, "That's actually terrifying." "Yeah," he said. "I know the feeling." Leo interrupted with a demand for the blue bucket, received it, and went back to his project, which had evolved over the past several mornings into something ambitious and multi-structural that Leo referred to only as the system and declined to explain further. "He won't tell me what it is either," Daniel said, noting her expression. "Does he know?" "I think he's figuring it out as he goes." "Smart approach," she said. Daniel looked at her steadily. "Is it?" It wasn't really a question. She felt the edge of it, gentle, not unkind, but precise. She looked at her closed laptop, which she had not opened this morning, which was perhaps a first. "Okay," she said. "Point taken." He almost smiled. "You know what I noticed," she said after a moment. "What?" "You never ask me about Reed Industries. What it does, what I've built, the numbers, the most people ask about all of that within the first 5 minutes." "I know what Reed Industries is," he said. She stared at him. He raised an eyebrow. "Infrastructure technology, enterprise software, expanded into data security about 4 years ago. Listed on Forbes twice Inc. 3 times. You gave a TED Talk in 2021 that got about 4 million views." She was genuinely speechless for a moment. "You looked me up," she said. "First morning, after you went back to your chair. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you introduced yourself as Sophia, not Sophia Reed, CEO." He looked at her calmly. "Figured you probably had a reason for that." She sat with that for a long moment, the consideration of it. The fact that he had known all along and hadn't changed the way he spoke to her, hadn't shifted his posture or his tone, hadn't treated her differently based on the Forbes listings or the TED Talk or any of the scaffolding she'd spent 15 years constructing. "Most people change when they find out," she said. "I know. That's why you didn't lead with it." She looked at him. "Did it change anything for you?" He thought about it. "It explained the laptop on the beach," he said. "And the phone calls. And the..." He paused. "It explained the way you hold yourself, like you're always waiting to be challenged." "Am I?" "First time I saw you, before you'd even noticed us, you had this look on your face." He searched for it. "Like you were reviewing a spreadsheet, of the ocean. She laughed out loud. It surprised her, the realness of it. The absence of the controlled professional laugh she used in meetings when something was appropriately amusing. This one came from somewhere unguarded. "That's accurate," she admitted. "Horrifyingly accurate." He smiled then, the full one finally open and unhurried, and she made herself look away before she did something embarrassing with her expression. "You said you watched the TED Talk," she said. "I said it got 4 million views. Did you watch it?" A pause. "Yeah. And?" "You were impressive," he said. "Very polished. Very certain." Another pause. "You seemed tired." The word hit her somewhere specific. "The talk was in March," she said slowly. "We'd been in litigation for 7 months over a patent dispute. I'd fired my CMO in January, and Gerald Ashby had spent February trying to restructure the board in a way that would have effectively made me a figurehead in my own company." She stopped. "I was tired. Are you tired now?" She looked at the water. Leo was talking to himself while he built a continuous narration of the system's progress that floated back to them in fragments. The morning was doing its quiet, unhurried thing. "Less," she said honestly. "Being here, being with..." She stopped, recalibrated. "Being away from it. I didn't realize how far I'd gotten from anything that felt like..." She searched. "Like mine. The work isn't yours anymore. The work was mine when I was building it. Now I'm maintaining it, defending it, growing it in directions that make the board comfortable, which sometimes means not growing in the directions that actually make sense." She exhaled. "I built something, and then it got big enough to have its own opinions about what I should do." "That's not uncommon," he said. "That happens in the Navy too. You sign up for something you believe in, and then the institution starts to feel like a different thing than the idea." "Did that happen to you?" "Parts of it." He was quiet. "I still believe in the mission. I believe in the people I served with. The institution." He shook his head once. "That's more complicated." She understood, and she understood that understanding was part of the strange, unexpected ease of this, the way they'd found a common language, not because their lives looked anything alike, but because underneath the specifics, some of the pain was the same shape. "I'm going to tell you something I've never said to anyone outside this situation," she said. He waited. 6 months ago, I had a panic attack in a bathroom at the Ritz-Carlton in San Francisco. I was there for a conference keynote speaker, packed room. Everything was going fine. I went to the bathroom between sessions and She stopped. I sat on the floor of a bathroom stall in a $1,200 suit and couldn't breathe for 6 minutes. I timed it. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't offer the reflexive, "I'm so sorry," or the well-meaning but useless, "Have you tried meditation?" He just listened. "And the worst part," she said, "was that I got up fixed. My face went back out there and gave the second session, and nobody knew. I was so good at not showing it that I scared myself." She looked at her hands. "That was when I finally made an appointment with the therapist." 6 months ago, he said. 6 months ago. "And the therapist sent you here?" 3 months of sessions, and then yes. She sent me here." She looked around. Crescent Bay, Oregon. Population 2,200. 1 coffee shop. A bookstore. She paused. "You." The word sat between them, simple and complicated at once. "I'm not a prescription," he said carefully. "No," she agreed. "I know. I didn't mean it like that." She thought about how to say the next thing. "I meant that I've been here 6 days and something is different. Not fixed. Not resolved. Just..." She put her hands out, a gesture she didn't usually make. "Looser, like something I've been holding is less gripped." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him deciding something she could read, that in people, it was one of her skills, the ability to watch someone arrive at a decision in real time. He was deciding how much of himself to offer back, and she found herself hoping in a way that was new and slightly frightening that he would decide to give her a real answer. When I came back from my last deployment, he said, I had Leo, and I had a 3-bedroom house in Portland, and I had nothing inside that was working right. I didn't know how to be home. I didn't know how to be small after being in something that big. He looked out at the water. I drove here, Crescent Bay. Just put Leo in the car and drove. I'd never been here before. We stayed for 10 days in a place just like yours, and I don't know what it did exactly, but when I went back, I could breathe again. She stared at him. You're joking, she said. No. You came here, to this beach. Different part of the beach, but yeah. She shook her head slowly, not with skepticism, but with the slightly vertiginous feeling of a pattern that was too neat to be coincidental and too real to dismiss. So, you come back, she said. Every year now, he loves it. He nodded at Leo. And I need it. We both do. She looked at Leo, who had now recruited a piece of driftwood into the system and was wedging it into place with the focused determination of a small engineer. Why Crescent Bay, she said. Specifically. I don't know. Some places just... He searched. Some places are quiet in the right way, not empty quiet, full quiet, like something's actually in it. She thought about what he'd said that first morning before she'd started paying real attention. When you work too much, you forget how to hear the water. She'd written it off then as something nice that didn't apply to her. Now she turned it over in her mind and felt it differently. Felt the specific truth in it, the way it named something she hadn't had a word for. She'd forgotten how to hear anything that wasn't functional, useful, measurable. Daniel, she said. Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing. It was the most plainly, directly honest thing she'd said to another person, in years possibly ever stripped of all the packaging that usually came with her admissions, the strategic vulnerability, the calculated openness, the honesty deployed for effect. This was just the actual thing. He looked at her with an expression she still hadn't fully learned to read. Not pity, not the slightly self-satisfied look of someone who'd known this and waited for her to catch up. Something more like recognition, like seeing a version of a place he'd been before and remembering how it felt to stand in it. That's okay, he said. It doesn't feel okay. It doesn't feel okay at first. He picked up a smooth stone from near the edge of his towel and turned it over in his hand. The not knowing is actually it's where things start, not where they end. That sounds like a fortune cookie. It's still true. She looked at him. How are you this patient? I have a 4-year-old. You develop patience or you lose your mind. Is that all it is? He thought about it honestly. No, he admitted. I think I was always more comfortable with slow things. I don't do well with fast. The Navy was fast. Combat tempo, decision tempo, everything compressed. I was trained for it, and I was good at it. He paused. But I think underneath, I was always someone who needed things to be slow. I just didn't know that until I couldn't do fast anymore. She thought about herself, the inverse of that. How she had built her entire life around fast decisions, fast results, fast growth, staying ahead of the thing that would catch up to her if she slowed down. She'd been afraid of slow for so long that she'd stopped questioning whether the speed was serving her or whether she was serving it. What's the thing that would catch up to you? Daniel said. She hadn't realized she'd spoken the last part out loud. Quiet, she said. And then more honestly, myself, in the quiet. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer, like it made complete sense. That's the hardest part, he said. Getting okay with being alone in the quiet with yourself. Taking everything away, the title, the metrics, the armor, and just being whoever you are underneath all of that. What if whoever's underneath isn't enough? She said. The question came from somewhere so deep and so unguarded that she felt exposed, the moment it was out. Felt the reflex to walk it back, to lighten it, to deploy a self-aware laugh that would distance her from it. She didn't. She let it sit. She sat in it. And Daniel sat in it with her, and he didn't rush to fill it with reassurance. Because he understood, she could feel that he understood, that the question didn't need an answer right now. It needed to be said. It needed to be out in the air, where it couldn't do as much damage as it had been doing in the sealed, airless dark where she'd been keeping it. Leo ran back to them at full speed and crashed into Daniel's side without ceremony. "Dad, the system needs more rocks." "Where are you getting them from?" "I need you to come find some." Daniel looked at Sophia, a question in his eyes light and genuine. "You okay?" She nodded, and meant it. He got up, took Leo's hand, and they walked toward the water's edge together. The tall man and the small boy, the easy, practiced rhythm of them. And Sophia sat in her chair and watched them, and felt the question she'd asked floating somewhere above her, still unanswered, still real, but lighter somehow, like she wasn't carrying it entirely alone anymore. She picked up her phone. She looked at it for a long moment. Gerald's text. Marcus's voicemails, the 11 emails still waiting, and then she turned it face down again, closed her eyes, and listened to the water. And for the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, she heard it. She called Marcus at 9 the next morning and told him to handle the Hendricks closing without her. There was a pause on the other end that she recognized as the kind of pause that meant Marcus was recalibrating, processing the fact that Sophia Reed had just handed off a $40 million deal negotiation without a single qualifying instruction. "Without you," he repeated. "You know the terms. You know our floor. If they try to move the indemnification clause again, hold firm. We've been over this." Sophia. "You're ready, Marcus. You've been ready. I've just been too used to doing everything myself to let you prove it." A beat. "Call me when it's done." She hung up before he could argue, which was, she recognized, still a control move. But it was a smaller one. Progress possibly. The morning felt different after that. Not lighter exactly, more like something had shifted in the foundation of it a degree or two off from the way things usually sat. She stood in the cottage kitchen and drank her coffee without her laptop open and without her phone in her hand, and tried to figure out what that feeling was. It took her a few minutes to place it. It was the feeling of having trusted someone. She hadn't done it in a long time. Not in the real way, not in the way that meant releasing your grip on something and letting another person hold it. She'd delegated, that was different. Delegation in her world was managed transfer-controlled outcomes, a longer leash on the same rope. What she'd just done with Marcus was closer to something else. It was closer to faith, which was a word she didn't use often and wasn't entirely comfortable with. She was at the beach by 7:30. Daniel was already there, sitting on his towel with a paper cup of coffee from the cafe in town. She could tell by the logo and a look on his face that said he hadn't been there long. Leo was 10 feet away, engaged in what appeared to be a highly technical extension of the system, now incorporating a piece of rope that Sophia was almost certain he hadn't had yesterday. "Where did he get the rope?" she asked, dropping into her chair. "Tide pool," Daniel said without looking up. "He says it was abandoned." "Was it?" "It was tied to a buoy that may still be using it, but we're working through the ethical dimensions." She laughed. It kept getting easier to do that, which was either very good or something she was going to have to think about later. She had not brought her laptop. This was a decision she had made standing in the cottage doorway that morning, laptop in one handbag in the other, and then she had put it down, walked out, and pulled the door shut behind her with the deliberate calm of someone diffusing something. Her phone was in her bag. She had promised herself she would check it once at noon. Daniel noticed. She could tell by the way he looked at her bag, the absence of the rectangular shape, and then back at her face, and didn't say anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. "Better," she said. "Not great. Better. That's the direction. I called my VP this morning, handed off the Hendricks deal." He looked at her. "How does that feel?" "Like I let go of a railing." She considered. which is either brave or stupid, I'm still determining. Could be both, he said. Most brave things are. Leo appeared at Daniel's knee without warning, as he tended to do, materializing the way small children did when you'd stopped tracking their location. Sophia, Leo said, with the gravity of someone issuing an important summons. Leo, she said. I need a second person, for the system. She glanced at Daniel, who offered nothing in the way of rescue. What does a second person do? She asked. Hold things, and pass rocks. And don't move the rope. Sounds like a critical role. It is, Leo said solemnly. Dad already said no. I said my back, Daniel clarified. His back is fine, Leo told her. He just doesn't like getting sandy. I get sandy every morning, buddy. Only because I make you. Daniel rubbed his face in a way that was trying very hard not to be a smile and failing. Sophia stood up, brushed off her hands preemptively, and followed Leo to the system. She spent 45 minutes on her knees in the sand passing rocks and holding sections of rope that Leo positioned with an engineer's precision and a 4-year-old's complete unwillingness to explain the larger logic. She didn't ask. She just did what she was told, and there was something in that, in the simple act of following someone else's vision, without needing to understand the whole plan, that felt unfamiliar and oddly restful. When Leo finally declared the system complete and stood back to survey it with his arms crossed, she sat back on her heels and looked at it too. It was a network of shallow trenches and rock formations, connected by the rope with shells marking what appeared to be specific nodes. It made no obvious sense. It was also, she realized, kind of beautiful. What does it do? She asked. It moves the water, Leo said, like this was self-evident. Where does it move it? Where it needs to go. She looked at it again. Okay, she said. I can see that. Leo seemed satisfied with this answer in a way that he hadn't been with Daniels, who she suspected had asked more follow-up questions. She was learning that with Leo you got further by accepting the premise than by interrogating it. She stood up, brushed the sand from her knees, and walked back to her chair. Daniel was watching them with an expression she'd come to recognize, open, quietly attentive, the particular look of a man who was paying attention to something he valued. You're good with him, he said. I just did what he told me to. That's literally the whole secret, Daniel said. You figured it out faster than most adults. She settled into her chair. The morning had warmed up, the particular easy warmth of an Oregon coast day that never got too hot, but made you forget you'd ever been cold. She felt the sun on her face and didn't immediately calculate what she should be doing instead. Can I tell you what I've been thinking about? She said. Go ahead. That question I asked you yesterday. What's underneath when you take everything else away? She paused. I've been thinking about it since I went to bed last night. I couldn't sleep because I was thinking about it. What did you come up with? I came up with the fact that I've been Sophia Reed's CEO for so long that I genuinely don't know if there's a Sophia underneath who exists separately from that. She said it steadily, not with the false calm of suppression, but with the actual calm of someone who has looked at a hard thing long enough that it stopped being quite so unbearable. I was 29 when I started Reed Industries. I'm 44 now. That's 15 years of that being the primary thing. The first thing. The whole thing, basically. You're 44, he said like he was checking the number. Is that surprising? A little. You seem... He thought about it. You seem like someone who's been carrying something for 44 years? Yeah. She looked at him sharply. That's not a compliment. It wasn't not a compliment, he said. It was just what you look like. She didn't know whether to be irritated or grateful. She settled on some imprecise combination of both. I started the company because I wanted to prove something, she said. I've said this to my therapist, so it's not new terrain. I know what this is. I wanted to prove that I wasn't the kid everyone forgot about, that I was worth noticing. She looked at her hands. And then I proved it somewhere around year 4, when we hit our first 100 million, and the thing is... She stopped. The thing is, you didn't feel it, Daniel said quietly. She stared at him. How did you know that? Because it never works, he said. The proving. You can do the thing, you can get the number, you can win the argument, or the promotion, or the whatever the metric is, and you look up, and the part of you that needed proving is still standing there, still waiting. He was looking at the water, his voice even. I know, because I did the same thing in a different direction. Medals commendations, early promotion. My CO called me the best tactical mind in the unit, and I went back to my bunk every single time and felt nothing that resembled enough. He paused. The hungry thing doesn't care what you feed it. It just stays hungry. The silence after that was the kind that had weight. So what do you do with it? She asked. You stop trying to feed it, he said. You learn to look at it differently, not as a wound that needs healing, not as a deficit you're filling. More like... He searched. More like a part of you that's telling you something true, that it wants to belong somewhere, that it wants to matter to someone specifically, not to everyone generally. To someone specifically, she repeated. Leo, he said simply. That's where it went. Not away. Just into something real. She thought about that, about the difference between mattering to a room full of people who were impressed by her and mattering to a specific small, irreducible person who wanted you to pass rocks and hold rope and witness the moment they jumped over a wave. The difference was enormous. She could feel the size of it. I got a text from Gerald Ashby last night, she said, because she needed to move carefully toward the thing she was actually approaching, and she needed to do it in steps. The board member. He's been sending me materials about the Q3 review, prep documents, agenda items, talking points. She pulled her phone out, looked at his last text. He sent one last night at 10:15 that said, and I quote, I know you're on leave, but you'll want to see the revised growth projections before the meeting. Some of us have been here working. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, just slightly. He actually sent that, he said. He did. What did you say? Nothing. I didn't respond. She looked at the phone for a moment, and then put it back in her bag. Which for me is that's new. I would normally have responded within 20 minutes with something very precise that made him feel the exact size he deserved to feel while being professionally unimpeachable. I'm very good at that. Why didn't you this time? She thought about it honestly. Because he wanted a response. Because he wanted to know that he could reach me here, that he still had the thread. And the only way I know to cut the thread is to not pick it up. Smart, Daniel said. Exhausting, she said. Managing Gerald Ashby has been exhausting for 7 years, and I'm starting to think that's not incidental to the job. That's the job. Or a significant part of it. She paused. And I'm asking myself for the first time with any real seriousness whether I want that to keep being the job. The admission sat between them like something that had been set down carefully. What would the alternative look like? Daniel said. I don't know. That's... She let out a slow breath. That's what I can't see yet. I know what I have. I know every inch of what I have. The company, the role, the structure. I've built it so carefully for so long that I can navigate it in the dark. And the idea of... She stopped. Leaving it, he said, because she hadn't. Changing it. I'm not sure I'm ready to say leaving. She frowned. Maybe changing it enough that it becomes something I actually want again. What would that take? Taking my hands off more of it. Trusting people the way I trusted Marcus this morning. She paused. Stopping the performance of being the person who runs it and just... She searched. Just actually running it. Fewer Gerald Ashbys. More actual work. Can you do that from here? The question landed quietly without pressure behind it, but she heard what was underneath it and felt something in her chest contract and then very deliberately release. I don't know, she said. I've never tried. He nodded. Didn't push. Never pushed. My leave ends in 4 days, she said. He looked at her. Okay? That's it. Just okay. What do you want me to say, Sophia? She looked at him. He used her name rarely. She'd noticed it landed differently when he did, had more weight, made her feel seen in a way that was still slightly disorienting. I don't know, she said again. That phrase, which she'd barely used in 15 years of controlled, certain forward-moving life, had become more familiar this week than any phrase she could remember. Leo came running back and planted himself between them with his hands on his knees, catching his breath. The tide is coming, he announced. It's going to reach the system. What happens when it does? Sophia asked. We'll see, Leo said with a 4-year-old's perfect comfort with the unknown. She looked at Daniel over Leo's head. He was watching her with that steady, unhurried expression, and she thought about what he'd said. The not knowing is where things start, and she felt the truth of it more completely now than when he'd first said it, sitting close enough to it that she could feel its edges. Come watch, Leo said, grabbing her hand. She let him pull her toward the water. The three of them stood at the edge of the system and watched the tide come in. Daniel, with his arms crossed. Leo bouncing on his heels. Sophia, with her hands loose at her sides, which was not how she usually held herself, and which she only noticed because it felt different. The first finger of water reached the outer edge of Leo's construction, and found one of the channels moving through it in exactly the way Leo had apparently designed it to. It's working, Leo breathed. Yeah, Daniel said. It is, Bud. Leo grabbed Sophia's hand again without looking at her. An unconscious reflex, the reaching of a small child who wants to share something and reaches for whoever is standing next to them. His hand was small and sandy and completely certain that she would be there. She held on. She held on and watched the water move through the channels Leo had built, filling each section in turn, and she thought about what it meant to build something that worked. Not because you were there forcing it, not because you were managing every variable and anticipating every problem, but because you'd thought about the shape of things and trusted that the water would find its way. She thought about Reed Industries, about Marcus, who was right now sitting across a table from the Hendricks people holding the line on the indemnification clause without her there to hold it for him. She thought about Gerald Ashby's 1015 text sitting unanswered. She thought about the panic attack on the bathroom floor in San Francisco, the white tile, the suit, the 6 minutes. She thought about what Daniel had said about the hungry thing, that you couldn't feed it into silence, that the only thing that worked was letting it mean something real to someone specific. Leo's hand tightened around hers as a bigger wave came in and flooded the system all at once, filling every channel simultaneously. He made a sound that was pure, unguarded joy, the sound she'd heard that very first morning when she'd been staring at her laptop and he'd been knocked flat by a wave and laughing at the sky. She looked at Daniel. He was already looking at her. Daniel, she said. Yeah. She didn't know exactly what she was about to say. She started it anyway, which was new, which was frightening, which felt like walking out onto ice that you haven't tested yet and deciding to trust it. I don't want to go back to what I was doing, she said. I can't do it the same way. I don't think I can be in that life the same way. She paused. I don't know what that means yet. I don't know what it looks like. But I know that I don't want to go back to not being able to hear anything. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, Okay. Okay, she repeated. What does okay mean? It means... He breathed out slowly. It means, I hear you, and I think you mean it. He looked at the water. And I think the question of what you do with it is one of the harder ones, and I don't think 4 days is enough time to answer it. No, she agreed. But I don't think I can unknow it. You can't unknow something you've actually seen, he said. That's the problem, and the thing. Leo had crouched down to inspect the aftermath of the flood on his system, assessing the damage with the calm, systematic interest of a small person who is not attached to outcomes, but is very interested in what they reveal. "He's going to rebuild it," Daniel said. "I know," Sophia said. "He does it every time. The tide comes in and levels it, and he starts over. He never gets upset about it." She watched Leo pick up a rock and begin placing it with fresh intention, already building again the ruined system, already becoming the basis for the next one. "I want to be here tomorrow," she said. "You're here for 4 more days," Daniel said. "That's not—" She stopped, steadied herself. "I mean, I want to be here. Present. Not—" She looked at her bag, at the phone inside it, at the invisible weight of everything in it. "Not performing being here, while actually being somewhere else." Daniel turned to look at her fully. And this time, the expression on his face was something she didn't have to work to read, something that moved through her clearly and simply, the way real things do when you're finally still enough to feel them. "Then be here," he said. 2 words. Quiet and direct, and without a single calculation behind them. She nodded, once. The way he nodded, like a decision made and meant. "Okay," she said. And she looked at Leo building his new system from the ruins of the old one, already completely absorbed in what came next, and she thought, me too. Marcus called at 2:17 in the afternoon. Sophia was sitting on the cottage porch with a glass of iced tea she'd made herself, not ordered, not had someone make, actually made, which involved finding a saucepan and reading the instructions on the tea box, like a person who had not had domestic staff since 2015. And when his name came up on her phone, she felt the familiar pull of it. The reflex, the almost physical lean toward the thing that had always defined her. She picked up. "Tell me," she said. It closed. Marcus's voice was different from how it usually sounded, looser, higher, the voice of someone who had just done something they weren't entirely sure they could do and discovered that they could. "They tried to move on the indemnification clause exactly like you said. I held. They pushed back once more. I held again. And then their counsel asked for a 10-minute recess and came back and said they'd accept our terms." She closed her eyes. $40 million. Clean terms. The line held. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah." "You did that." A pause. "We prepared for it together." "I wasn't in the room." Another pause longer. "No," he said. "You weren't." "How did it feel?" She heard him exhale, almost a laugh, almost something else. "Honestly, terrifying, and then really good, like really good." "Good," she said. "Hold on to that. That's yours now." After she hung up, she sat for a long time with the phone in her hand and the iced tea sweating onto the porch railing, and she thought about what it meant that the thing she'd spent 15 years believing only she could do had just been done well and completely by someone she trusted. She waited for the feeling she expected, the territorial sting of it, the slight diminishment, the CEO reflex that wanted to reframe the victory so that her presence was still central to it. It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and more unexpected. Something that felt with a precision that surprised her like relief. She was at the beach the next morning, with her phone in her bag, and her laptop in the cottage, and her hands for the first time all week entirely empty. Leo saw her from 50 feet away and came running with the particular urgency of a child who has been waiting to tell someone something important. "Sophia," he said, arriving breathless and grabbing her arm. "Sophia, there was a seal." "When?" "This morning, before you got here. A real one. It was right there." He pointed at an unremarkable stretch of water with the conviction of an eyewitness. "It looked at my dad." "What did your dad do?" "He said hello," Leo said, like this was the obvious correct response. She looked over Leo's head at Daniel, who was setting up the towel, and gave her a look that said, "Yes, I said hello to a seal. Let's move on. Good morning, she said. Morning. He handed her a coffee, the cafe cup, the logo she recognized now. Got you one. Oat milk, right? She stared at him. How do you know I take oat milk? You mentioned it on day 2. When you said the cottage only had 2%, and it was a personal failing of the rental market. She took the cup. It was exactly right. She didn't examine too carefully what it meant that he'd remembered, because she already knew, and the knowing was warm and slightly terrifying in the way that real things tended to be. Thank you, she said. The Hendricks deal close? He asked, sitting down. Yesterday afternoon. Marcus held the line. How do you feel about it? Relieved, she said. Which is that wasn't what I expected to feel. What did you expect? Something more complicated. She looked at her coffee. It used to be that every win felt like evidence, like another point proven, and this one felt like... She searched. Like the first time I drove away from something and felt okay about what I'd left behind. He was quiet for a moment, processing that. That's different, he said. Very. Leo had already returned to the system, which he was rebuilding, with the calm focus of someone who had absorbed the previous day's lesson about tides and was now incorporating it into the next design. Sophia watched him work and thought about what Daniel had said. He does it every time the tide comes in and levels it, and he starts over. He never gets upset about it, and felt it differently this morning than she had yesterday. Not as an observation about Leo, but as something that had a specific address inside her. She had spent 15 years not letting the tide come in. Not letting anything level what she'd built because she was afraid that if it was leveled, she'd find she couldn't rebuild it, that the building had been a one-time event, lucky, unrepeatable, and that underneath the company and the title and the Forbes listings was the kid from Connecticut that everyone forgot about, standing in the ruins, unable to start again. But Leo just started again, every time, without drama, because starting again wasn't defeat. It was just what you did. I've been thinking about what you said, she told Daniel. About the hungry thing. That you can't feed it into silence. What about it? I think mine has been eating the company for 15 years, she said. And the company is full, and the hungry thing is still hungry, and I've been throwing more at it. More deals, more growth, more wins, more Gerald Ashbys to outmaneuver. More evidence. She paused. And I think I'm done with that. He looked at her carefully. What does done look like? It looks like not walking away from Reed Industries because I built it and I'm not leaving it in Gerald Ashby's hands, not now or ever. Her jaw set slightly on that, the familiar steel of it, and she felt it and didn't try to soften it because some things were just the truth. But it looks like running it differently. Giving Marcus more, restructuring so that it doesn't require me to be everywhere at once, moving the center of gravity so that... She stopped. So that you can be somewhere else, he said. So that I can be somewhere else, she agreed. The somewhere else hung between them, and she let it hang because saying it too precisely felt like rushing something that deserved to move at its own speed. Daniel looked at his hands. When he looked up, he had the expression of a man who had been deciding something and had arrived quietly and without fanfare at his answer. I want to say something, he said, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. She felt her pulse do something specific. Okay. I've been coming to Crescent Bay for 3 years, he said. Every summer. And in 3 years, I've never... He paused, choosing carefully. Leo talks to everybody. He always has. He'll walk up to strangers on the beach and tell them about crabs and shells and whatever he's building, and I'll follow behind him and meet whoever he's decided to adopt for the morning. And I'm polite, I'm friendly, and after 20 minutes I go back to my towel. He was looking at the water. I haven't sat with the same person for 7 days in a long time. I haven't wanted to. She waited. What I'm saying is... He breathed out slowly. I'm not good at this. He gestured, slightly frustrated with himself. At the words for it. I'm better at just being present somewhere, and letting things develop, and not naming them too early. Daniel, she said. Let me finish. Sorry. He almost smiled at her apology. What I'm trying to say is that something changed for me this week. Not because of who you are on paper, not the CEO, not the Forbes thing, not any of that. Because of... He stopped. Because you apologized for something you didn't have to apologize for on day 2. Because you held a live clam like it was a grenade and didn't drop it. Because you helped Leo build something you didn't understand and didn't ask him to explain it. Because you said, I don't know what I'm doing, like it was the first true thing you'd said out loud in years. He looked at her then. Because I think underneath all the armor, you're actually someone I want to know. And I haven't thought that about anyone in a long time. The honesty of it moved through her like something clean. No subtext, no strategy. Just the plain, exact truth of what he meant offered, without pressure, without expectation of a specific response in the way she'd come to understand, was simply the way he gave things completely or not at all. She had a response prepared. She had 3, actually, in the way that she always had responses prepared, tiered by vulnerability level, each one more or less revealing, depending on what the moment required. She didn't use any of them. I called my therapist this morning, she said instead. He waited. Before I came here, I told her about this week, about... She gestured the same slightly helpless gesture he'd just made. About all of it. She was quiet for a minute, and then she said, Sophia, for the first time in 3 years, you called me without a problem to solve. She looked at her coffee. And she was right. I called her because I wanted to tell someone, not because I needed to fix something. What did she say? Daniel asked. She said stay as long as I needed to. A pause. I told her I was thinking about changing my leave from a week to 2 weeks. She didn't say anything, she just made that sound. What sound? The sound therapists make when you've done something they've been waiting for you to do for 6 months. She shook her head, almost amused. Very gratifying for her, I'm sure. 2 weeks, Daniel said. 2 weeks, she confirmed. If that's... She stopped. This was the part she'd rehearsed least. If that's not strange, given what I just said, and what you just said. He looked at her steadily. It's not strange. You're sure? Sophia. His voice was patient, a warmth in it she felt clearly. I just told you I want to know you. 2 more weeks is not a hardship. She looked at him. He looked back. And between them was something neither of them was in a hurry to name, which felt right. Which felt like the correct speed for something built on honesty, and live clams, and holding rope for a 4-year-old who wouldn't explain his vision but trusted you to help anyway. Okay, she said. Leo appeared between them with the precision of a small person who has a talent for entering scenes at maximum impact. Are you staying? He asked Sophia directly. She blinked. Were you listening? No, he said unconvincingly. Are you staying? She looked at Daniel, who was carefully examining the middle distance. For 2 more weeks, she said. Leo absorbed this. And then... I don't know yet, she said. He considered this with his father's patience, which was remarkable in someone who still needed help with shoe buttons. Okay, he said. That's okay. He looked at her with his dark, steady eyes. Daniel's eyes, she'd noticed the same color, the same quality of attention. We have time. She felt the words hit somewhere soft and unprotected the way Leo's words always did, because he had no idea he was being profound, and that was exactly what made him so. Yeah, she said. We do. That afternoon, while Leo napped in the cottage Daniel had rented 2 doors from hers, which she'd learned only on day 3, which had made her laugh at the particular smallness of the world, she sat on her own porch and made 3 calls. The first was to Marcus. She told him he was being formally elevated to Deputy CEO effective next quarter, with a corresponding adjustment to his compensation and decision authority. He was silent for so long, she thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Sophia, are you serious?" And she said, "I don't make jokes about org structure." And he laughed like a man who'd just been told he could breathe. The second call was to her chief of staff, who she tasked with researching what a remote executive model would look like for Reed Industries. Genuinely remote, not the performative kind, not 3 days a week in the Portland office and the rest on calls. Actually remote with real latitude, real presence, wherever she chose to be. The third call was to Gerald Ashby. She'd thought about this one the longest. He picked up on the second ring. "Sophia, I expected to hear from you sooner." "I'm sure you did," she said pleasantly. "Gerald, I've been reviewing the Q3 prep materials you sent. I want to address the question of the growth projections directly." "Good. I think there are some concerns." "The projections are sound," she said. "Marcus will be presenting them as the new Deputy CEO of Reed Industries, which I'm announcing next quarter. You'll receive the official memo." She paused, just half a beat. "I also want to address your text, the one about some of us working while I was on leave." A very particular silence on his end. "Gerald, you have been on the board of Reed Industries for 9 years. In that time, you have been professional, occasionally useful, and consistently committed to a version of this company that centers your comfort and your assumptions about what leadership should look like. I have managed that gracefully for 9 years because it was politically necessary." She kept her voice even, almost warm. "I'm letting you know directly and privately that the political calculation has changed. I am not leaving Reed Industries. I am not burning out. I am not a succession question. I am restructuring in a way that serves the company's next phase. You're welcome to be part of that, or not. But the 10:15 texts end today." Another silence. Then, "I see. I thought you would," she said. "I'll see you at the Q3 review. Say hello to your wife." She hung up. She sat for a moment with the phone in her lap and felt the clean, specific satisfaction of a thing done exactly as intended, not from fear, not from the hungry place, not as evidence of anything. Just because it was right and it was time, and she was finally not afraid of what Gerald Ashby thought of her. Then she went inside, opened the novel her assistant had picked 3 weeks ago, and read for an hour without stopping. The last 3 days of the original week and the 2 weeks that followed moved differently from anything Sophia had experienced in recent memory. Not slowly, she would have struggled with slow, and she knew it, and she was still working on it. But fully. The way minutes felt when you were actually inside them instead of planning the next ones. She and Daniel took Leo to the bookstore on a rainy Tuesday, and Leo picked out a book about ocean animals, with the seriousness of someone making a long-term investment, and Sophia found herself buying the novel she'd been intending to read for 2 years without anyone suggesting it. They ate at the one good restaurant in town on a Wednesday night, while Leo narrated the menu to them from memory and then fell asleep with his face on Daniel's arm before the check came, and Daniel paid without making it a thing, and she let him, and the letting was easier than she'd expected. She worked, but differently. An hour in the morning clean and bounded, then closed. Marcus called with updates she received without redirecting or correcting. The Reed Industries machine moved without her hand on every lever, and while it wasn't perfect, there were 3 decisions she would have made differently. 1 meeting she would have run better. 1 vendor call that went longer than it should have. It moved. It held together. It proved something she'd been afraid to test. One evening, near the end of the second added week, she and Daniel sat on the porch of his cottage, after Leo was asleep, and she told him the thing she'd been turning over since the second day. "I used to think being in control was the same thing as being safe," she said. "And now," he asked, "now I think being in control was the thing I did instead of feeling safe." She looked at the dark line where the ocean met the sky. "I was never actually safe. I was just busy enough that I couldn't feel the absence of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you feel it now?" he said. "The absence." She thought about it carefully, the way she'd learned to this week, not rushing the answer, letting it come from somewhere real. "No," she said. "Not right now." He reached over and covered her hand with his. Not a gesture with any demand in it. Just presence, warm and deliberate, and entirely certain of itself. She turned her hand over and held on. On the last morning, the final day of the extended stay the morning before, she would drive back to Portland and walk back into the specific weight of her life. The three of them went to the beach at dawn. Leo's idea proposed at 6 in the morning, with a fully planned agenda that Daniel had summarized for her as build something, jump some waves, eat the granola bars. They did all three in order, in the pearl gray light of an Oregon coast sunrise that moved through colors she didn't have names for and that she made herself watch without reaching for her phone to photograph, just letting it happen in real time in her actual eyes, belonging to no one but the moment. Leo built the most ambitious version of the system yet, wider, more complex, incorporating everything he'd learned about the tide's behavior over 3 weeks of careful research. He directed both of them, and they followed without question. And when he finally stepped back and declared it ready, the three of them crouched in the sand together and waited. The tide came in. The water found the first channel, moved through it, found the second, the third. The long curve Leo had spent 20 minutes getting exactly right. It moved through the whole system. Every channel, every node, every shell-marked junction, the way Leo had intended, the way he'd planned for, the way he'd rebuilt after every previous failure, until he understood what he was working with, well enough to work with it rather than against it. Leo made a sound that Sophia would remember for the rest of her life. Pure, uncomplicated, wholehearted joy. The same sound she'd heard the very first morning when she'd been staring at a laptop and a small boy had been knocked flat by a wave and laughed at the sky. She looked at Daniel. He was watching Leo with the open, unguarded expression she'd come to love, the full version of his face, the one he saved for the things that mattered most to him. He felt her looking and turned, and she didn't look away, and she didn't manage what her face was doing. "I'm coming back," she said. "I know," he said. "I mean, I'm not—" She steadied herself. "I don't know exactly what the shape of it looks like yet, the logistics, the timing, but I'm coming back. Sophia." His voice was quiet, steady, the voice that had been telling her true things for 3 weeks. "I know. I believe you." "How?" she asked. "How do you know?" He looked at her for a moment, and in his expression was something that had no calculation in it, no strategy, no management, just a man who had learned the hard way to recognize when something was real. "Because you stopped performing it," he said. 3 weeks ago, you told me you were attempting a vacation. This morning, you didn't tell me anything. You just showed up." He held her gaze. "That's the difference. That's how I know." She felt it land in the exact place it was aimed, the place that had been waiting underneath 15 years of proof and performance, and $1,200 suits on bathroom floors for something true enough to reach it. Leo grabbed both of their hands at once, pulling them toward the water where the next wave was already coming in. "Come on," he said. "We have to watch." They let him pull them forward, the three of them standing at the edge of what Leo had built, the water, doing the thing water does. Finding every opening, filling every space, moving through what was made for it with the patient, unstoppable certainty of something that has always known the way. Sophia Reed stood there in the wet sand, her hands full, the ocean loud and indifferent and magnificent in front of her, and she felt for the first time in so long that she couldn't name the last time, entirely simply here. Not performing here, not planning the next thing, or defending the last thing, or feeding something that would never be full. Not Sophia Reed, CEO, age 44. 2. Forbes mentions 4 million TED Talk views. Current holder of Gerald Ashby's deepest professional anxieties. Just Sophia, standing in the water, holding on, and that finally was enough.